Well, good morning and welcome to Friday at Ramsbury House for Going to Ground with Puritan Soap. Our sponsor washes your soul yellower than it's ever been. Well, I've just been out for a morning walk. Actually, it was a run this morning and saw all kinds of things, among them a barn owl. Fantastic. A barn owl flying just ahead of me along the fence posts. And Sarah Mango, if you're watching, it was an owl, not a pigeon. Out on a country drive with our friend Sarah a little while ago, I got her to stop and pointed and said, "Look, an owl." It was a pigeon. But this was an owl. I haven't seen a hare yet though, and I'm longing to see hares. I love them, and March is nearly out. Catherine Blundell in the Chalk Valley rang this week, or I rang her, and she saw a congregation of 8 hares. I don't know what you call a gathering of hares. 8 in a field near her home. I'm longing to see one before spring is out. Well, how are you getting on? And I wonder how you're finding all of these remote conversations. I'm getting quite used to pressing this little reverse camera button on the phone, and as I try and settle down first thing in the morning to pray, I realise that what I'm trying to do is to press that button so it turns out and away from me. And one of the main ways in which prayer is frustrated and interrupted, of course, is that we find that keeps flipping round to look at ourselves. We reflect upon ourselves rather than God, our neighbour, and the world beyond us. And the process of settling into prayer is one of constantly pressing that button so it doesn't just, we don't just reflect upon ourselves. And persist with that. If you've tried it and you think, all I can think about is is me, then just keep doing that. Just keep pressing the button, keep turning it round and offering that as your worship to God. We're approaching Passiontide, Lent's final push, and things begin to get a little bit serious. It's Passion Sunday this Sunday, and I wanted to read to you a piece I wrote a couple of springs ago called All the Vain Things. I've owned this nice 1968 edition of Pascal's Pensées for over 20 years, unread, though looking great on various bookshelves. Like other items in my fantasy vanitas, cars, guitars, record sleeves, the style and the idea of the thing, where it leads my imagination, is always as attractive as actual knowledge, I have to admit. But lately I've been reading a little of it each day, first thing between sips of hot tea, and beginning to see why Malcolm Muggeridge often cited Pascal as one of the handful of luminous thinkers who convinced him that Christianity was both beautiful and reasonable. Like a desk drawer of small but potentially useful items, many of which don't have an obvious purpose or reason for being there, Pensées is really a commonplace book of thoughtful bits and bobs, representing the mathematician's notes towards a rational defence of Christian belief, which were recovered after his death in 1662, the same year as the prayer book was published in its present form. Accordingly, quite a lot of it seems random and inscrutable, with odd phrases like Pensée number 107, the parrot wipes its beak although it is clean. Offer that to you as a little bit of wisdom for the day ahead. These are included as if requiring no further elaboration. However, just when you think you're reading a 400-year-old philosophical shopping list, treasures like this turn up. Vanity, writes Pascal, is so firmly anchored in man's heart that a soldier, a rough, or a cook or a porter will boast and expect admirers, and even philosophers want them. Those who write against them want the prestige of having written well. Those who read them want the prestige of having read them. And perhaps I, who write this, want the same thing. Perhaps, my dear readers. For Pascal, the internal conflict faced by men and women arises from the duality of human nature. That sense of our own greatness always threatening to overinflate our ballooning pride, vying with alertness to our abject failures, which leads so easily to despair. That's what we were talking about yesterday. The resulting crisis confounds even those who appear to have everything. A king, writes Pascal, left to ponder and reflect on what he is, will soon grow morbid without the limp felicity of constant distraction. Goodness me, how we're battling with that at the moment in confinement. The limp felicity of constant distraction. I wanted to read to you another passage which just hit me between the eyes when I first read it a year or two ago, 400 years before social media. Pascal writes, "We are not satisfied with the life we have in ourselves and our own being. We want to lead an imaginary life in the eyes of others. And so we try to make an impression. We strive constantly to embellish and preserve our imaginary being and neglect the real one. And if we are calm or generous or loyal, we're anxious to have it known so that we can attach these virtues to our other existence. We prefer to detach them from our real self so as to unite them with the other. We would cheerfully be cowards if that would acquire us a reputation for bravery." So much of what we present to the outside world is just a dust jacket, concealing an entirely different story within. The inner discourse, varying as it does between the vain and the venal, needs and secretly longs for a third voice, telling us that we are not God, yet calling us to God. The older I become, the more I realize that this is pretty much the heart of my spiritual desire. A longing to surrender my overweening ego to a higher cause, a higher personality than my own. Early morning attempts at prayer before glancing at the fairground mirrors of social media consist largely of this, and a huge release it is too. Passiontide approaches, and with it Isaac Watts' unsurpassed line from When I Survey the Wondrous Cross: "All the vain things that charm me most, I sacrifice them to his blood." I long to do the same, and, with apologies to Ray Davis, wish I could be like Isaac Watts. To be put in my proper place, with God in his. I have often said, writes Pascal, that the sole cause of man's unhappiness is that he does not know how to stay quietly in his own room. He's right, I think. And if I can do that without gazing the while at my groaning shelves, so much the better. God bless you as you go to ground.